Welcome to the podcast, fellow griever. I'm Melissa, your host, and I'm with you on this journey because my own incredible 21-year-old son, Alex, died by suicide on August 7th in 2016. My world was shattered, but slowly, bit by bit, I began the difficult journey of rebuilding a new life, just like you may be doing right now. So know that I see you, because I am you. Thank you so much for being here. It truly means more than I can say. And if you are new to the podcast, please consider listening to the introduction, Meet Me, episode number 1, which is now linked in the show notes starting in late season 6. Listen to know what to expect from the podcast, to learn more about me, and so that you will know all that I offer in my community for support, connection, and healing. If you are not a new listener and haven't listened to this Meet Me episode recently, it's updated and you may learn something new. Every week, we will continue to explore the questions that haunt us, seek the courage to uncover the healing tools within us, and offer the comfort of a community we all need so very much. Come along with me, because this is so very lonely, but we do not have to be alone. Together, let's choose to find meaning and even happiness amid the leftover pieces before us. Welcome to today's episode. Hello and welcome, fellow griever. And today I am going to be joined by Reshma Kearney, a trauma-informed mindfulness and healing guide who helps people navigate grief and the life transitions after suicide loss with both compassion and resilience. After losing her husband, Sean, to suicide in 2022, Reshma has chosen to dedicate her life to creating spaces where grief can be honored, where healing can be nurtured, and hope can be rediscovered. And you guys know I'm a fan of all of that. She works with adults, teens, and children, blending grief education, mental health awareness, mindful parenting, and trauma-informed support to help others live meaningful lives after suicide loss. Our conversation weaves through things like resilience, parenting, and the power of mindfulness, of course. And our conversation includes things like age-appropriate ways to talk with kids about difficult topics, including loss. We talk about how having mindfulness tools in place before her husband's death, including with her children, helped shape their healing journey after loss. She talks about parenting through grief and why a child's outcome is so connected to the resilience of their mom or the parent that's left behind. Her husband's military service, including 3 deployments, and how that affected his mental health. We also talk about how children's yoga became a powerful practice during the pandemic for their whole family and continued to be a foundational part in her family's life afterwards and still today. We also round up with talking about things like skills for mourning and grief and how they're different than skills for living and thriving, and how she supports others through her one-on-one coaching. Fellow grievers, this is a really heartfelt, real, and hopeful conversation about meeting grief with presence, nurturing resilience, and finding ways to live fully while carrying what we cannot change. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Let's welcome Reshma. Hello, griever. And if your heart's been nudging you to put words to your love, maybe this is your sign. I'm personally inviting you to add your voice to the Because They Are Loved poetry and letter anthology being written for and by suicide loss survivors. Pricing is intentionally low, but through September, you can save 10% more with coupon code podcast10. Not sure you're ready? Join my live workshop this Wednesday, September 10th. Come and get input, rework a piece that you already have, or just co-work in good company of other grievers. Also, Check the show notes for the next date before month's end, because I may indeed offer another workshop. If cost is in any way a barrier, message me. There are limited scholarships available. And if you're able to help someone else submit, there's a donate to the scholarship button on the anthology page, and every dollar goes to scholarships. A portion of proceeds of this project are also donated, with the beneficiary changing every 6 months. So let's put an advocacy piece out into the world that honors our loved ones and carries their legacy forward. Find all the information and ways to submit through the show notes or directly at theleftoverpieces.com. Hi, and welcome today, Reshma. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Melissa, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm good. It's my honor. I'm going to ask you to start us today by sharing your lost story with us.
Yeah. I lost my husband, Sean, to suicide in 2022. He had just gotten out of the Army 9 months prior. We moved from Georgia to Washington, where we were supposed to start forever. His loss was a complete shock to all of us. Sean had depression and anxiety for many years, and I would even say every year that got darker and longer, but we always got him out of it. He was a hardworking, intelligent, super talented go-getter. I used to always say, Sean will never give up, even when everybody else wants to give up. Everybody else wants him to give up. He will not give up. This was a shock to us because in our minds, this is the ultimate giving up, right? But over time, as I started to process the loss, what he had been going through, and learning about depression and suicide, it wasn't a surprise. He didn't want to be in this world anymore.
Yeah. Interesting you say that, because you just hit the topic I talk about a lot, which is education gets us so far. That was a turning corner when I started to educate myself on the suicidal mind and suicidality and even depression to a point, mind, because, and I say that, and that sounds like the little people, but to people sometimes, but it's just like any ailment of the body, there is chronic and acute illnesses, and the mind is no different. It's our biggest, most complex organ. We know so little about how our brain really works. I struggled, like I'm sure many people did in the very beginning, with when people would say, oh, I didn't know your son had mental illness. I initially felt defensive because I wanted to say, well, he wasn't mentally ill. Well, of course, I've completely lined how I think about mental illness, because that's part of the stigma, is everybody believing that mental illness is some poster child for that person you see in a movie, and our brain goes there. Just the same way we already know things like a functional alcoholic may not look like what the poster child of a TV alcoholic looks like. So many of us carry these implicit biases that we had growing up forward. And I was kind of prickly to that idea that my son had some form of a mental illness. Now I understand there's so much I didn't understand about his predisposition, but it didn't mean he had to have a lifetime full of understanding that our mind can break even in a short period of time, and we no longer have the control to be the person that can pull yourself out of it. There are times that our mind has played such tricks on us. And that can happen to some people very quickly and impulsively, and different ages respond differently. In other cases, it's something fought on and off their whole life. And at some point, like you said, couldn't do it anymore. That's why I often talk about suicide is most often not about dying. It's about making the pain that they're in end. And oftentimes believing they're ending the pain of those around them, when in reality, they're transferring the pain.
Right.
But that's not the way they see it. By and large, people that die by suicide, it's the last thing they want to do is hurt the people they love, which tells you right there how, I mean, that was a turning point for me to even say, out of my whole world of inner family and people, Alex would probably have stood towards the very top of people that doesn't like conflict, doesn't want people to hurt, would help anybody he ever could, had been there for many of his friends. So logic dictates the last thing Alex would do is hurt us. I just know that was who he was. So that tells you something broke, something wasn't right in the moment when people say he made a choice. Yeah, it's not the same choice the way we think of, am I wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt today? It's a very different type of choice rooted in things much more complicated than that. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about Sean's case, exasperated by the fact that he had been in the Army and recently gotten out. I think from what you said, I'd love you to speak to that, as well as obviously a history of struggles that seem to be getting harder.
Sean was an orthopedic surgeon and a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He separated from the Army after 16 years as a lieutenant colonel. In those 16 years, he deployed 3 times. He spent several months in Afghanistan, Iraq. His last deployment before he passed away was in Syria. I think he had a lot of childhood trauma when we met, and even over the course of our marriage. All I heard about was his parents' divorce and estrangement with his siblings. And he lost his dad when he was 27, just when we met. Every year, he had more trauma. Being in the Army and medicine and being a man didn't create space for him to feel safe enough to ask for help. There were so many moments in our home when he would be leaning on me and I would gently encourage him to ask somebody else for help. And that could have been asking his colleagues for some time off. I encouraged him to maybe get a prescription. The furthest I got him to seeing a therapist was when I demanded marriage therapy after his second deployment. In those sessions, anytime we came close to talking about childhood and family, he had this way of brushing it to the side. And his last 2 years in the Army included the pandemic in 2020. Also in 2020, we moved from North Carolina to Georgia soon after he was deployed. Then in 2021, when he returned from Syria, just a couple months later, he separated from the Army. And in January 2022, he joined a private orthopedic group in the Seattle area. The kids and I stayed for the remainder of the school year in Georgia and reunited in summer of 2022, just months before he ended his life. A lot happened in a short time.
Even as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking that's major things, not just small things.
It's a lot. I mean, we all went through mental health challenges, time of uncertainty during the height of the pandemic. And then you throw on top of that, selling a house, deciding what you're going to do with the house, moving to another state, deploying, thinking about your future. It was a lot. And I knew it was a lot for him, but there were so many years leading up to that point where there was a lot in our lives. We always got through it together. And I think we just got to a point where he couldn't keep getting through.
Since you had spent so much of 2022 away from him, were you aware that maybe he struggled a little deeper during that period? And by the time you made it together, you only had a few months left with him. Do you feel like looking back, Sean ever got to a place that he had kind of made that decision? Or do you feel like it was impulsive on his part? Do you feel like, because this speaks to the guilt, I want you to talk about how you've had to make it through your pain. I want to transition into some of that because guilt plays such a big part. At least if it was me, I would wonder whether, did I miss something because I wasn't there? Speak to that, because I know a lot of people have had that same type of feeling.
Yeah, of course. I'm always wondering if I missed something during the months that we were apart, but even during the months that we were together, I didn't feel a change in his behavior. There were days he'd be down or complaining about the new job or upset that I didn't move with him. Just things I thought were natural. I thought this is just one of those times in our lives that we're going to not see eye to eye on this and we're going to get through it. So even in terms of like drinking and anger, the things that I saw increase when we finally reunited, when we were together again at the end of May, beginning of June, it was like we were on top of the world. We were finally going to be in Washington State, where we had been trying to get back to for years. We had our 3 kids. He got a job right away, which was one of his biggest stressors. We were making plans for the future, had dreams, what kind of house we were going to build, and this new chapter of our life. In August, I started to see a shift. He seemed really stressed at work, upset, questioning his decision to get out of the Army, to join a particular practice. I thought this was just part of the growing pains of the move and transition. Even the week he passed away, we had a birthday party for our youngest 6 days prior. She turned 7, 6 days before he passed away. The day after he passed away, he was supposed to go on a fishing trip with a good friend in Canada for about 10 days. My parents were supposed to fly to Seattle to stay with me while he was gone. He did buy a gun in Georgia before getting out of the Army and before moving, knowing that Washington State, it'd be harder to get a gun. When I asked him about it, because I wasn't comfortable with it at all, he convinced me we needed it for protection in the Seattle area. So it was just something I couldn't talk him out of doing. But now when I look back on that, I think, did he get that in Georgia because he knew he wouldn't be able to get one in Washington? Did he think he was going to use it at some point?
In the military, he would have had weapons assigned to him of some sort. It was part of their uniform.
So he had access to it when he was deployed, but he didn't have access to it
like at home. Greater access in the military, maybe getting out, not having access bothered him. Sounds like there could have been a thought process there with him that he was keeping an option open, even maybe there wasn't a set plan in place with dates and things like that.
Yeah, because he had the plans for the fishing trip, but we had planned out the next 8 to 9 months in terms of travel and when we would start thinking about our home. I think he was in a moment and something took over hold of them.
Words are so hard in this loss. They're so inadequate for us often. Impulsive isn't necessarily the right word, but it's trying to paint that picture of, was this methodically planned step by step, or was this something, like you said, I feel like Alex had something come across him in a moment that he made a decision he couldn't take back. Had he had time to reason, think, and had the right person to help and process that, I don't believe my son actually didn't want to live his life. I don't believe my son didn't want to figure out how to not feel that way. Because like your husband, he had plenty of plans. When I saw him 8 days later, he was gone. We talked about him possibly switching college. He had sat down with somebody in the family and talked about a business plan for when he got out of college. It wasn't as if he was like giving away his car and all of his possessions, the things we see on the checklist that on some level, I always say that's like, do you know the basics of CPR? Do we know the basics of stroke signs? It's good to know the outline, but at the end of the day, some of what we talk about for suicidal awareness, as far as are they doing these things, and it's the checklist, the research needs to go further, because the people that I tend to see over and over again that ended their life, most of them don't fit that checklist. We're afraid to go deeper into the personality types at risk. They may not be giving their stuff away. They may not be calling everybody saying, I love you. That happens once in a while. It's just not the norm. Our checklist is outdated because so many people have said, Melissa, I didn't see any of that stuff. I didn't either.
I'm glad you're bringing that up because that really triggers me during Suicide Prevention Awareness Month and the campaign. We need these movements for me to keep talking. As a survivor of suicide loss, when I see that suicide is preventable.
100%. I'm like, let's see the title for 100% of breast cancer is preventable. You're not going to see that.
I try to voice that on social media about our story. I hold that compassion for survivors because that's the last thing I wanted to hear after I lost my husband. When I was going through guilt, anger, and sadness, and then to see the sign of things that I should have looked out for, knowing I never saw those signs. The night before he died, he was outside practicing using his fishing rod for the trip. He went to Trader Joe's and bought snacks for his trip. He had a full day of surgery scheduled for the day he died. He didn't give anything away. He didn't say goodbyes. He didn't even give me and our kid, any special type of goodbye the night before.
Because he probably didn't have that next day picked. Unknown events occurred that day, even within minutes, within an hour, but within a short period of time, probably he made a decision he couldn't take back. It is so hard. I, like you, lean in and try to hold space for survivors during these awareness campaign months, but I purposely stay out of some of that. We've got to stop leaning into, well, it's mental health month, so we're going to talk about it. I don't want to put unrealistic messages out there just for the sake of putting them out there. We need realistic messages out there. You're a survivor. You've lost your person, your spouse, and you are a parent. So you're having to parent grieving children. And then at some point, you decided to bridge mindfulness practices to get you and your family through the pandemic. I didn't mind being isolated during the pandemic, but I was 3.5 years in when the pandemic hit to my loss. It gave me a chance to breathe, but many had to have a lot of skill sets to get through the pandemic. So then you took that skill set after loss and also bridged that into helping other survivors. I have 2 other living children, but my youngest got tucked into college a week after we had his brother's memorial. I was experiencing empty nest at the same time. I'll never be able to tell anybody what empty nest felt like because I lost my son at the same time. So I don't know how to unmesh the two, but you had to figure out how to parent young children who were grieving. Talk about that.
The hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I feel the universe prepared me for this role because I had a yoga and mindfulness practice during the pandemic. We brought that practice into our home for the children. I always, invited my husband to take part, but he didn't really resonate with him as much. But with the kids, it started as breaks throughout the homeschooling days because we were quarantined, had no access to the outside world, and I had to manage their schoolwork, starting the morning with meditation, getting movement, going outside, picking up nature parts and making artwork, sharing feelings, talking about emotion. Doing these things shifted the energy in our home. I had a friend who taught kids yoga and mindfulness, and my kids had taken classes. I want to do this at some point in my life. I was passionate about it because my husband was struggling with depression and anxiety and didn't feel safe to get help. I thought, I want to do this for children so they don't have to struggle like he does. I especially want to do this for our children. The plan was that once he got out of the Army, I would pursue a business in kids yoga and mindfulness. Fast forward to 2022, when we lose him, at the time, I forgot about all those practices. In that moment of shock for the months following, I wasn't thinking about, let's get outside and touch grass. I was thinking, I don't care if I'm ever happy again. All I want to do is get my kid back to a place that is as close to normal as possible. And that's what I did for several months. I only got out of bed because of my kid. I got out of bed every morning to walk them to school. And I would go back home and I sit with all the paperwork. Unless you've gone through any type of walk, you don't realize you're not just dealing with emotions and other human beings, but
it's all
oh my God, you're on hold with people. You have to repeat the story over 20 times when you're not ready to repeat the story.
To order birth, death certificates that you never wanted to have, all the minutia, bank accounts, things that we all know, but that other people assume you're just sitting with their memories crying. And that's enough. But there's more to it than that.
I called it the post-tragedy cleanup. That's what I did every day. After a few months, I was drained. The whole time, my intention was to create this healthy space for my children, but I was pouring in bitterness, resentment, and fatigue. I heard a quote: outcomes for children who've experienced trauma and loss are largely dependent upon the resilience and coping skills of their mother. That was the light bulb moment for me. I decided I need to make a change. That's when I realized these mindfulness practices we've always into our lives are actually our lifelines. I slowly brought those things back in. I would drop the kids to school, but then I would walk for 20 minutes. And that 20-minute walk turned into a little bit longer. And then during the walk, I would call my parents. That phone call evolved into a call to other family and friends. I slowly started connecting with people and accepting help, which was hard for me. I was proud of being a military spouse who could hold down the fort without help. We learn as spouses in the military to accept help. I've learned that now, and I have no problem asking for help. With the kids, I started bringing back their practices. So I got back to journaling and meditating, and I got back to the yoga. Each of my kids responded differently. My son responded to breath work, my middle one to journaling, and my youngest one, who had just turned 7 the week before her dad died, she's a free spirit and loves to be outside barefoot. Anytime I saw her light dim, I knew I needed to get out in nature. And we know exactly what we need to be grounded. We know what practices to bring back.
All trauma has grief, but not all grief has trauma. Suicide loss is traumatic grief. There are varying scales of what we experienced. It's still all trauma-based with this grief and suicide loss. We have to find the skills for coping and living through the immediate mourning period, the after grief. On some level, we learn to live alongside our grief successfully. Many people never lean into their trauma healing. Trauma occurs at different times in our life. If we don't deal with it, it doesn't resolve itself. Time is a great tender to things, but it doesn't fix anything. It just passes. It's what we do with the time that's important. During that time, employ or learn skills to just live, to just survive, to get to that place that we can not be keening and wailing mourning, but starting to grieve in a healthier way, learn to heal our trauma and reframe our trauma triggers. We are bridging to a place to address this with your children and yourself. And I always tell people they're called practices for a reason. It's not meant to be something you have necessarily ever perfected, but it's meant to be something you practice throughout your life and hopefully find more proficiency, more peace as you become more practiced. But many grievers look at this grief journey as something to fix, that I'm going to come out the other side somehow. Now, whether we were ever okay or not is debatable in itself, because the human condition, we're all living in some state of flux and growth. But this is a major shattering when something like this happens. There's a part of us that thinks, I just have to go fix this. Give me the tools I need to fix it, and then we'll get back to my old self, right? A lot of people are holding their breath, waiting for us to get back to our old selves, when really what happens is a complete shattering, and you have to do a bridge with a rebuilding. That life you rebuild has to involve lifelong practices that are, like you said, a skill set that you now have going forward. When you slide, because we all do, you have that tool chest. I may not always open all those drawers, but when I need them, they're there because I've worked really hard at practices and skill building. I need to get through the rest of my life. So speak to how mindfulness, if it wasn't a part of your life before, how it serves you, but then how it really needs to serve people that have experienced trauma and grief forever to remain healthy. Because what happens if we lay those practices down?
We have resilience, but we're not born with the tools. That's why it's important to teach kids mindfulness early. If they have those tools, we're all going to slip at some point, whether it's law, trauma, school, sports, or social media. It has a huge effect on mental health right now. So a resilient self-loving, confident teenager is going to respond so much differently to social media than somebody who doesn't have those skills. Mindfulness is not just for those who are grieving or those who have mental health challenges. I feel mindfulness is for prevention, self-care, and self-love.
For health.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm really grateful that we had these things in place. And that's why I say I think the universe prepared me for this new chapter of our lives. And you ask what would have happened if we didn't have these practices, we would probably have jumped into therapy, and we probably would have not all gotten the same type of benefit in our healing that we have with mindfulness practices. And that's not to say if there's anything wrong with therapy. I don't think there's anything wrong with therapy or medication. I just don't think it works for everybody. My oldest was in therapy before his dad died. I had put him in therapy when we moved to Seattle a month or two before his dad died. He was starting his preteen years, and I was seeing some of that anger and frustration that I had seen in his dad. I wanted to get somebody to help him work through that. He stayed in therapy after his dad died and is still in therapy. It's great for him. His therapist is a male, which is good for my son right now. My middle one, I put her in therapy after her dad died. She was in for 9 months and then graduated. We were given specific things to help her continue healing. Mindfulness practices, art, being out in nature, dancing, journaling. My youngest one hasn't been in therapy. I've had her meet with a counselor this past year to talk about anxiety and balance. And I know that every year looks different, and I'm not going to close the door on that option. But for now, this is where we are. What I'm doing now with mindfulness practices and listening to my mind and body is helping.
I'm in the exact same place that you are with therapy. I haven't needed therapy yet, and I'm 9 years in. I'm open to it and could at some point feel like I need that. I've had plenty of talk therapy in my life. I'm definitely not against it. I think it plays a really important role. I think all of us have to have some form of talk therapy. I just happen to be able to get that component met in a different way, meaning I happen to be lucky enough to have one or two people that I felt like I had that ability to talk through things with. I didn't have an existing therapist. It wasn't something I was choosing to go out and feel like I was going to get what I needed out of that. But it doesn't mean I don't think it has a place or that it's the wrong choice for some people, along with medication. If somebody needs to go that route, then they need to go that route. You made a really important point. A lot of people assume that getting straight into therapy is what's going to help. And then months in, they find that it's not necessarily helping. You made me think about bread and how the main ingredient in bread is always the flour. We're not going to go into the gluten-free world for a minute, but when you talk about bread, the main component is always going to be flour. But you can't just throw flour in a bowl and have bread. You have to have the other components too. Mindfulness is the flour in this kind of journey. And then within that, you're going to have to pepper in possibly some sort of therapeutic element. That could be therapy, it could be coaching, it could be a combination of the two. There's probably some sort of nutritional value you need. Different bread requires different small ingredients, while the base is going to always stay the same. So it feels a little bit like that. And a lot of people get sideways in thinking that therapy in itself is going to fix it. And then they're stymied by the fact that this isn't fixing it. Because what I start to do, and you're a coach, so you understand this, what I start to talk to people about is talk therapy exists primarily to look backwards and review the things we've been through and pull ourselves to a place to look forward. But therapy in itself on a psychotherapist's couch doesn't do a very good job at reframing and learning to look forward into what does tomorrow look like? What does your future look like? Where coaching can help reframe and move forward. I'm not going to move on from my son. I'm always going to have my son with me, but I have to learn to move forward, because if I do nothing but stay looking backwards, that isn't going to serve me, or like in your case, all your children. How is that? And I have, even though my children are not young living at home, I'm still their mother. They're still looking to me for guidance and how to survive and how to go on to thrive with this. That's the baggage that a lot of people bring to suicidality. They've never thoroughly learned a way to move things through their body and move on with it. They take it, they shove it in this little place, and they stick it over here on a shelf, and it stays. You and I talked about stuck emotions. So I'm a big proponent of mindfulness practices. It's that societal thing of something bad happened, run to therapy, and that's going to fix it. We can't fix everything. To learn to live with it, carry it better, but we aren't going to go, I'm done grieving. It's all okay. I'm good now. People sometimes say, you seem pretty good. Are you back? Are you back to where you were? No.
I know.
Are you back to where you can use your arm again? No, it's not growing back. Yeah. I've had to learn to live around it. Do you feel like any challenges with your kids have stood out that others might grow from?
What I've learned with the kids, I've learned two things. I've learned that they are thinking and feeling much more than I can see. And it's only in moments of connection and quiet that I'm able to hear about their thoughts and their feelings. That serves as a reminder to myself to slow down and give them space. We want to hold them and take all that pain away. But I've learned that that's not doing them any good, trying to just jump in and fix everything. So I give them the space to do that. And my son very firmly but kindly said to me once, Mom, sometimes I just want you to listen and say, yeah, that sucks. I don't need you to give me advice or fix it. He's very emotionally intelligent. I'm proud of him because of the work we've been doing since he was young. He knows how to listen to his body, and he knows how to check in, and he can verbalize all the emotions, and he's still working on his responses to them. He's 13, right? But yeah. I'm proud of him. I've learned that we have to let them lead the way in terms of grieving and healing. We learn so much from our children. Sometimes they show me things I've never thought about. And so again, that's why it's important to give them space, time, and to trust the journey and process.
Things happen the way they do, and it doesn't happen the same for everybody. The timelines are not, there's not a timeline, and there's not a, oh, you're in this stage now or whatever, because we're going to bob and weave in and out of different things depending on what we're going through, depending on our age, all the things. And you brought a really important point up, which was these kids are so smart. Listen to them. Sometimes the biggest thing is just listen. Don't discount them as kids. They're smart little people. They know more than we give them credit for. Ask them and then listen, see what they need, see where you need to meet them versus trying to just cover it up or say, we don't want to talk about that, or whatever the case might be. Raising emotionally intelligent children. This leads to the next point, which may be a good place to wrap up. I think you and I both have a similar thought process. Suicide itself can't necessarily be cured. We should be able to dial this back. It's a process because it's become an idea people are familiar with. The more we become familiar with an idea, the more likely it is that it's going to perpetuate. That's just part of it. And so we've now made it a possibility. I'm 56, 57 at the end of this year. We didn't grow up thinking it was a possibility. Kids in today's world grow up knowing that anything's possible. They've been exposed to things we would have never dreamed of. They have to have different conversations. Their emotional intelligence has to be higher, quicker. Teaching them skills to deal with that sooner is, in my opinion, the key. Making mentally healthy, mentally aware children that grow up into adults that have an awareness of their mental health being as important and no less stigmatized than their physical health.
I absolutely agree. We have to start young, teaching them it's okay to feel. You don't need to hide behind a mess. You can be authentic. You deserve space, love, to be seen and heard. And I think that's something my husband didn't hear growing up. He was told not to cry. He was told to keep going, even in work, in the army, you're expected to push through. It's really important to open up more conversation about mental health and ways to support yourself early on. Absolutely agree.
Kids are the key. I have chosen, my heart has led me to work with especially moms, but suicide loss survivors after the loss. But that doesn't mean what I do doesn't want to bring awareness and work right alongside to bring awareness and prevention by discussing what we do to turn the tide, to make this not be an option. If we handle our emotions better from an earlier age, it may not be as likely a lot of people would ever get there because they have a different skill set and awareness.
And we as adults can model that for children. A lot of moms, after losing their husband, the father of their children, feel they cannot show their kid they're hurting or don't know what to do. When you do that as the role model for your children, they learn they also need to do that. I've always let them see any emotion. I've been vocal about my emotions, not just sadness, pain, and confusion, but even anger after Sean passed away. I was angry with him. I've come to a place of peace now, but I was vocal about that. I'm angry with Dad. And then they could tell me that. But can you imagine being, say, like a 10, 11-year-old boy who loses his dad and he actually hates his dad for doing that, but he doesn't think he can tell anybody that. Can you imagine the guilt a child, let alone an adult, would feel thinking they're the only one? I have conversations with them. I've talked about jealousy and envy. Because of course they're going to grow up feeling that way. They tell me when they see other kids with their dad, they feel I've created that space for them because I've told them I get jealous when I see couples making plans. I'm affected by that.
Well, I'm sure you have friends you've raised your kids around and from the military, and a lot of them are probably still couples. The thought that I now can't do the things I used to is something you would have to face, even though you may overcome it. Sometimes you may choose not to. Your kids seeing you navigating that and making choices accordingly is important to acknowledge the emotions in it. But we often use kids to lean into Pixar movies. The Inside Out series deals with emotions and panels. It's relevant because at least the first one, I have to admit, I've seen previews for the second one and I've yet to see it because I had promised to see it with my grandkids and they saw it without me. The premise of the first one, with Joy supposed to be at control at all times. And then, sorry if anybody hasn't seen it, spoiler alert, joy and sadness need each other. One doesn't exist without the other. And we were created with all of them for a reason. Even anger, I talked about that before. Yes, it does. Why were we given anger? If we didn't have anger, we couldn't protect our child in danger. We wouldn't have ever turned over countries and laws if we didn't have anger, determination. We can't just exist like happy, mindless unicorns, and movies like that are great for parents and children's discussions. Let's talk about the fact that all of those emotions were there and what would have happened if anger wasn't there. So I love that you're teaching your kids that. More people need to lean into those messages. Talk about how you bridged mindfulness and parenting and your lessons of grief into where you're at and where you're headed to help other survivors, including children.
I was on this path in kids yoga and mindfulness. And after Sean passed, I took a break because I thought it wasn't possible to work in this space, being the new, head of household. But I felt drawn to, I kept coming back to it after a year and a half. I came onto social media to start sharing my story because I wanted others to see that there is hope. And you can go through tragedy and still live a life where you have grief and joy, like you said, the duality. With the social media venture, so many people started reaching out and sharing their story. And I felt like, wow, I'm not alone in this. And this is helping others. I decided this is where I want to be. I want to support people on their grief journey, whether they've lost someone to suicide or going through a major life change. I got certified in trauma-informed yoga, and now I'm getting certified in a 200-hour yoga teacher program. I'm combining it all to support people who are grieving or going through other challenges in life. And so I do that in one-on-one sessions. I do that in some group sessions. And then I'm also really fortunate to have collaborated with a nonprofit group in Chicago called B360. I teach their community of kids and teens movement and mindfulness virtually. I'm helping them build their toolkit. I'm happy with what I'm doing on social media, sharing my story and the work I'm doing virtually and locally. I want to continue doing that. Lately, my kids have started to get involved. My son has been sharing videos, and my daughter's made a couple reels to raise awareness. I think that even for them, it's helping them heal as well. I just feel very grateful to be in this space.
I think the space is grateful to have you in it. I want to know before we end if there's anything you haven't had a chance to talk about that you want to make sure you do talk about.
One message I want to wrap up with is a reminder to survivors of suicide loss to be gentle with themselves, give themselves grace, honor themselves, allow rest, quiet, and time to look inward and give themselves what they need. This world is moving too fast. Our kids are spread too thin. We're maxing out every day. Just be gentle with yourself and love yourself enough to give yourself space.
Thank you for those words. I'll include all the places to find you there so that if they're interested in what you do or just getting inspiration or looking at your coaching, will you give one verbal place? Is it your website that you would like people to hear? Because I can put all the places in the show notes.
Yeah, you can add my Instagram to the show notes. And my website is reshmakearney.com. So just my full name.com.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much, Reshma. It's been my pleasure to have you on. Thankful to be working in a space with people like you doing this important work. I'm inspired and honored. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate the time. And the same goes to you. You've created such a beautiful space for survivors with your page, podcast, and resources on your website. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. And I hope we will talk soon. So thank you for joining me today, Grievers. If today's episode resonated with you, please consider subscribing to get weekly updates when I drop new episodes. And please take a moment to rate and review the podcast with 5 stars, especially on Apple Podcasts. Your support helps so much because it's how others are able to find the podcast and this community. Remember, though it may feel impossible now, hope and healing are within reach. I invite you to connect further by visiting my website, theleftoverpieces.com, where you'll find support, legacy options, retreats, resources, online Zoom groups, and so much more. Together, we can navigate this journey of healing. We can put our hearts, our leftover pieces, back together. And as they say here in Puerto Rico, poco a poco, juntas podemos. Little by little, together we can. Take care and talk soon.